Hello, everyone. Welcome back. It's good to be back. So, for those of you that didn't know, I've been away for a little while, which is why I sound a little bit different now, because I've been a bit ill. But we are back and slowly getting better, although my voice is sort of catching up still a little bit. So, welcome to the next hour where we are going to spend most of the time editing that, or editing in that piece of software up there, Capture One. Capture One being the raw editor that's made by the guys out in Copenhagen. So it takes your raw content from your camera, processes that, gives us a lot of tools that we can enhance, enrich, hopefully improve the image, maybe fix a few things along the way, and deliver an output that we're really happy with. That's the goal. And some of you have sent in your images. You're all free to do so. And we're going to be editing some of those today and talking through the process and what tools we're using, why we're doing it that way, and a load of other things. So to everyone that is old school and has been on these for a while, welcome back. Sorry for being away for a little bit. I tried, but unfortunately, it turns out that human beings have some flaws when it comes to remaining functional. But we're here now. We're going to spend the next, as I say, hour going through this stuff. So it's going to be pretty impossible for us to avoid or ignore the email that went out a couple of days ago to every person that has a Perpetual license within Capture One. So we are going to touch on that. I'm going to keep it very short because the whole point of this session is to go on to some editing, which we're going to be doing. But I'm going to run through some facts because I'm seeing a lot of commentary out there and a lot of content on forums, which is subjective at best, fantasy at worst, and everything in between. And then I'm also going to share a bit of an opinion, which not all of you are going to like. I get it. But it is worth just being clear on where I stand. And also, more importantly, the hard and fast facts of what's actually happening that we know of. And to be clear, I don't work for Capture One. You guys know that. I am one of their ambassadors, but I do not have a corporate edict on it. I got the same email that you guys did as well. And that email basically points to the fact that there are some changes coming up when it comes to the Perpetual license and those that purchased it. So Capture One has always offered two different versions of licensing, one being Perpetual, which is not the same as you owning, just to be clear. There's no such thing as you owning the software. You have the license to use the software in perpetuity. Not the same thing. However, it meant that if you had that software, you buy that version, and you're entitled to use that version for as long as you want to or are able to, or as long as your software or your camera, for example, allows you to. And then you have the subscription option, which some people love, some people hate. It's a bit of a Marmite one. But the subscription option means that you either pay a fee every year or a fee every month, but you always have access to the latest version. So it's a different approach. Some people prefer perpetual licenses, some people prefer subscriptions. Now, what's happening with the perpetual licenses is, and this is actually a challenge that Capture One have faced for a while, because perpetual license owners tend to wait for this upgrade time, which tends to be around about this time every year, November, December, it creates a bunching up of development. So what it means is that Capture One almost hold back features because they need something to go into the next version, the big version, to entice people to upgrade their perpetual license. That causes development hiccups. It causes a rather than a nice smooth amount of effort for development throughout the year, you end up with these spikes and you end up with these false deadlines almost for getting code complete and so on. And there are some big benefits to flattening that out and getting it done over the year. So the proposal that came out and what Capture One are saying is going to happen next year is that perpetual licenses will no longer receive feature updates. So in other words, if you buy version 75.4, I'm using a mystery one for the sake of it, that's the version that you own. That's the version that you have the right to use. And it will not be upgraded to 74.6 or 0.7 or 0.8 or whatever. You buy that version and you stick with it. If you wish to then move to a newer version, there'll be an upgrade fee involved. Now, it has to be said, I think the way that this is communicated is appalling because Unfortunately, there's a very key piece of information that was missing from the communication, which is how much that upgrade cost will be. And what that's meant is a huge amount of speculation out there as to whether this is going to be more expensive, less expensive, impossible, or whatever in the future. And that's actually really unfortunate, because what we do know with communication, if you create a void, someone will fill it. And if it's not filled with fact from the horse's mouth, as it were, it'll be filled with fact or opinion from other people. And that's what's happening at the moment. So at the moment, we've got a bit of a half story. But I'm going to show you what it actually means in real terms based on what they've actually said, because there's a lot of confusion in there. And you'll see in the description of this video, there's a link to versions with releases and also the FAQs on this change. So first thing, if you're a subscriber to Capture One, there is no change. The email that went out does not affect you at all. You pay either every year or every month for the right to use the latest version with the latest bug fixes and the latest features. Great. That does not change a jot. If you have bought your license, your perpetual license to version 23 before February the 1st next year, so that's now and before, and for the next couple of months, not a lot changes actually. And this chart is really important. Oh, you're going to love this. I have a new pointer. It's a Grover pointer. So, yay. This chart is actually, I've actually mapped out along here the version 21 updates. So these were the actual releases. So the 0.0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, and 0.4. The version 22 releases here, and the bug fix releases. So the point something releases in blue. And this stuff here I've sort of made up as a bit of a I guess, plan or prediction for the future. There will be some updates to 23 to come. But the most important thing is, oops, shrunk a little bit. That was David. David made everything go small. The most important thing is these two bars down here. If you have a perpetual license that was purchased before the 1st of February 2023, you are entitled to bug fixes and releases, so that means feature releases, through until September the 30th next year. Now, if you look at the actual releases, the feature releases for Capture One, it means that pretty much you're no worse or better off than you were already. Your version 23 that you bought was only valid for version 23. And come September, October, there's no more feature releases released. We then start talking about version 24 in the old way of doing things. Now, what Capture One is saying is there won't be a version 24 that's coming out as a big release. It's just going to be updates that flow, so version releases. Now, what that means is if you have right now a version 23 license or purchase one in the next couple of months, you are entitled to exactly the same as what you would have had before this announcement. No different. You get your feature releases throughout the year up until the end of September next year, which is what it's always been. And you'll also get bug fixes for the next year up until the end of September, or in fact, it could even go further than that in theory, but basically until the next major release, or the next point something release comes out with a feature. So that's the plan, as it were. Now, if you buy a license after 1st of February next year, or the next version after version 23, and it's a perpetual license, remember, subscriptions not affected. If it is a perpetual license that is bought after February next year, you will get the version that you bought and bug releases until a new version comes out. And the new version is defined by any version that includes new features. And at that point, you will make a decision. Do I want the new features, or do I want to pay, and there will be a financial impact, to upgrade? Now, the bit of information that is missing, and they're talking about a loyalty scheme or whatever, the information that is missing is how much those upgrades will be. And that's unfortunate, as I say. It creates a scenario that wasn't necessary, in my view. But speculation is out there, and it's speculation based on no knowledge. I have no idea how much these upgrades will be. No one out there does. So, at the moment, all we do know is any license that's perpetual that's bought from February the 1st next year will include the version that you buy, the point whatever. So if it was 16.3, 16.4, whatever. It will also include the bug releases. So 16.4.1, 16.4.2, 16.4.3, and so on. The second it goes to 16.5 or 17 with a major release that includes new features, you do not have access to it. Subscribers do, but you will not. That is the difference. And the difference being, from a financial point of view, there will be an upgrade fee to move to those point releases. So whether I don't know, it's not my call. It's whether I agree with it or not is really here nor there. But that's the actual mechanism that's happening. So this is literally the announcement that's gone out. That's all the information that is out there. Anyone providing any other information or insights or whatever is speculating. So please be careful. So that's the facts. If you have a perpetual license already, you are no better, no worse off for the next year. You end up in the same place next September that you would have been anyway. So relax. And on February the 1st, they're going to announce what the difference will be in terms of the cost model. I don't know what that information is going to be. Very few people, I'm sure, do. But when it comes out, I'm sure we'll have a debate about that. But right now, this is all we know. That the license that you have for version 23, if you have one, or if you buy one now, carries on just like normal through to the end of next year. And then from that point onwards, a new model takes hold. Now, that's where we're at. That's all the information that's out there, and there is no other information to discuss on it. But I will give you some opinion. And as I say, not everyone's going to like this opinion. There's a big thing about subscription. And so whether you like perpetual or subscription is a personal choice. I get it. But what I'm seeing a lot of in forums right now is people saying, I'm never using Capture One again, I'm never using this again, I'm never touching that again. And it's the same people that said the same about Adobe when they switched to a subscription. Now, Capture One are not getting rid of perpetual licenses. They're not forcing anyone to a subscription. You can stay on a perpetual license. If you want control of when you upgrade, you now still have that control. But that doesn't mean that subscriptions are wrong, and it doesn't mean that that's a reason to use a software company or not. I find it odd. So I'm going to put a statement up which is intentionally inflammatory, but some people aren't going to like this. In my view, if the only reason, which is what I keep hearing, that you purchased Capture One was because it had a perpetual license or you hate subscriptions, in quotes, are you making creative decisions, or are you just trying to make a point about which software companies you like and don't like the practices of? Because to me, I don't buy that anything changes from a subscription to a perpetual license. To me, why did you buy Capture One in the first place? Has that changed? And there's a difference between value and cost. And we see this every year with upgrades. So whenever anyone upgrades their cameras, I see people spend $5,000 on a new camera, which means they now have to spend $500 on brand new memory cards because the camera needs them, and another $1,000 on filters because their lenses have changed, and then complain that they have to upgrade their software for a couple hundred. That's mad. So you're making financial decisions that control your creative direction. Now, cost is a big thing. I get it, especially now. So people are concerned about the cost of things rising and so on. But there's a difference between value and cost. And to some people, they'll see value in a price that's paid. To some people, they see it purely as a cost. But the idea of choosing the software that you use based purely, it can be a factor for sure, but purely on their licensing model, to me, just strikes as madness. Because to me, those things on the left, let me get the Grover up. Image quality, customized workflow, editing efficiency, output accuracy, color edition, powerful tools. That may not apply to Capture One for you. You may find a different software, piece of software that does that. Great. But all of those things are way more important to me than what the licensing model is. I don't have VHS cassettes on my bookshelf anymore. I don't have DVDs on my bookshelf. Why? Because the world has moved on. Netflix don't allow you to buy Netflix. You subscribe. And people don't have a problem with that, so I struggle with the vitriol I see about this subscription versus perpetual nature. That's my view. As I say, that's opinion. It's not fact. That's not come from Capture One. But to me, making a decision, I'll go back to that point. If the only reason you purchased a piece of software was purely because of its licensing model, that's not a creative decision. You're not choosing the best tool for the job or the one that you value the most. You're making a weird point that honestly no one gets. So I'm in a weird place. Maybe it probably doesn't agree with everyone's position, and that's fine. You don't have to agree with me at all. But I am in a place where when I look at this, which is what happens if you currently have a license, there's no change for the next year. If I look at the future, yes, of course, if you read between the lines, they're pushing people to subscription. You can see that. It's going to be easier to subscribe than it is to maintain a perpetual license. But they're not taking the perpetual license away. No one's removing anything. They're just changing the model. The sad thing, I think, for me is the communication has been a little shy of being complete, to say the least. And that means that people are now making decisions based on speculation rather than fact. So, monologue done. So I'm hoping that still helps people to understand why it's not quite the big deal that is being made of, but I do understand people's frustration, especially at the way that there's some information that's missing. And I do understand it's a change, and humans don't like change. We get it. But I would genuinely say if you have a license right now, A, you're fine, and B, wait until the 1st of February, get all the information that you need, and then make decisions based on that. Okay, there we go. Nice and calm. I know you're all commenting and stuff, but I don't want to end up with an entire conversation about the licensing thing. But I do want us to get into editing, so we're going to go into that now. Genuinely, I appreciate all the comments. The thread that was on the Facebook group, so if you go on to that little group there, that forum, you will see there's quite an active thread of people's opinions on it. And all of them are great. They're good opinions. It's great to voice them. It's great to see them and discuss. But please make decisions based on facts rather than speculation. And at the moment, we, including me, do not have enough facts to be able to make those decisions quite yet. Right, let's get into some editing. Yes. Right. This shot from Daniel. It's actually a pano shot. It's a pano stitch. And that pano stitch, there was a question that came from Daniel about the white balance in it. Now, I'm going to be pretty tough on Daniel here, hopefully for the future, because there's a few things wrong with the way that the capture was actually performed. So I think some of you will remember there was not a conversation, it was a live, actually, we did it, wasn't it? It was a live broadcast from London that David and I did when we did the original Pano Stitch launch, called a year ago or so on. And there are a few things that we need to bear in mind when we're capturing multiple images to stitch together within Capture One. So those images, we want them to be as static and as similar as possible. Now, from a perspective of what can be actually stitched together, Capture One does a very good job of looking behind the data, if you want to call it that, and merging. Because if I look at the hidden data or the raw data in this is image number 1. It's actually quite underexposed. Let's have a look at our histograms, all down here in the shadows, ISO 800, a 30th of a second. Image number 2, Daniel changed to a 1/5 of a second, so lightened it up quite a bit. And image number 3, a 1/3 of a second, so even lighter. So what we end up with is 3 images which are completely different exposures. And also it was left, from what I can work out, because these probably weren't dialed in values, as an auto white balance setup. So that auto white balance means that as the camera is looking around this room, it's getting different white balance readings and it's saving that into the file. It's using it to capture, which means we've got a warmish one here, a slightly warmer one here, and a much cooler image here. Now, Capture One, when we're stitching, will actually try to blend what it can. It tries to merge them together. It will use the light fall off. So if we go to our shape area here under lens corrections, you'll see the light fall off function. If your lens has any vignetting, this is a good thing to do before you stitch. Just set that to 100 before you do it. And there we go. So the temptation is to try and merge, I guess, these three files to make them very similar so that Capture One can do its merging. But I'm going to show you why it's not important. And this is the output. And Daniel's question is, how do we fix the fact that this is cool, this is warm? Is there anything we can do? So just to prove a point, this shot here, let's change our white balance there. And in this shot, let's change the white balance the other way. Really, really warm. So we go cold, warm, normal. And these are actually in the wrong order. So we're going to select those, stitch to panorama, get a little dialog box up. We can choose our panorama versions. So, for architecture, we might want a slightly straighter lined one. Panini might take a little second for it to work out. I'm not sure what these original files were, but hopefully we're not going to be waiting too long for the reveal. So remember, in pano stitching, you've got the 4 different options. Perspective works great on a tilt shift lens, but it also keeps your lines nice and straight if you don't have a tilt shift lens, but just don't push it too far. Now you see here, it is evened out that white balance to effectively our first one. So if I go to stitch, a little box should pop up. This one, there we go. And once that's done, we get a stitch. Now it hasn't effectively used all 3 different white balances. It's used a blend of them and delivered something that is sort of in the middle. So in other words, your white balance differences don't really matter to Capture One, because when it creates a panorama, it's trying to blend them all anyway. If I reset all of these to exactly what they were, let's just delete that one. So where they were in the first place, and we go to stitch it, effectively what I get is what Daniel's output was here. So don't worry about doing the white balance itself. In fact, this was the actual output, the original output. Don't worry about doing the white balance when it comes to the original files. Capture One will handle that. But at the point of capture, please lock your exposure. It's really difficult to expect the tool to merge different exposures as you start twisting, because remember, the overlap is going to be different. The overlap between previous exposure of a 1/5 of a second or whatever, the next exposure of a 1/3 of a second, the overlap is going to differ from one picture to the other. So how on earth is Capture One supposed to know which one you meant? So it has a hard time blending. In this case, it's done a good job despite that. So that's your exposure. The second thing is white balance. Lock it. Use a manual white balance. If you don't, you're going to end up having to fix stuff like we're about to here. Now the fixing, actually pretty simple. So, Daniel's put some layers on top here, but effectively they're all pretty global. So we've got some color layers and a bit of an adjustment there. And that adjustment, if I look at what's happened, was just, that one there, was just about protecting highlights and shadows and maybe a little bit of tweaking. But you can adjust your white balance selectively as well, or your color balance. So let's create a new layer, new empty layer, and we'll call it WB for white balance. New graduated filter, and we know it gets cold here and warm here. I guess one question is, which one is correct? Do we want warm or do we want cold? That's your creative decision. That's your artistic decision, as it were. But I'm going to create a gradient that goes solid here, just by stretching it across, all the way to nothing over here, 50% here, all good. Now, let's have a look at what we can do. So on the right-hand side, where it's 100% used or 100% covered in the mask, we can increase the warmth of our white balance. And then we get an evenness to this shot. We may want to increase that exposure a little bit to try and even it out again. Let's go to there. This has gone maybe a little bit too pink now, so we might want to adjust that tint. Remember, the white balance comes with both sliders. So if you start moving things warmer or colder and it starts going pinker or greener, use the tint to counteract that. But effectively, we can warm up that side by doing a white balance shift. So that's option 1. Option 2. Let's call it white balance 2. And I'll tell you what, quick one, just to help people. Copy mask from white balance. Invert mask. And I have exactly the opposite mask. Of course I could have drawn it, but always remember you can copy a mask from another layer, invert it, and you've got the opposite to what you had. The key thing is you have exactly the opposite to what you had, especially if you're trying to split things. So white balance 2, what we could do is cool down this left-hand side. Now, this then becomes personal choice. As I say, we might want to pull down some highlights, might want to pull down a bit of white just to get that glare gone as much as we can. But, you know, you've got a cool version, or you've got a warm version, or you've got the split version, which was what was originally captured. So you've got 3 versions now, just by adding a gradient filter and adding the white balance change on top of it. But we do it once it's stitched. We don't do it to the individual files, because when you do it to the individual files, they don't get ignored, but they do get they get blended, let's call it that, when it goes into the panorama. So you're better off stitching first and then dealing with color after. So let's have a look at option 2. And I think someone just mentioned Paula, I'm going to repeat what I said in a previous session, a nice picture to show color contrast. Yes, so we're going to go on to some color contrast now, which is a different way of managing this. So the different way of doing it, let's create, let's do it with a new layer, just because I'll color balance, and we're going to add another gradient. So nice soft gradient again from this side across to there. And with that, we can go down here to our color editor, because what's happening here is, if you look, it's actually the shadows and the midtones that are cooler. It's the highlights that are warm. And if you think, so again, think about this situation. Where's the warm light coming from? It's coming from outside. It's sunlight. So it makes sense that it's the light areas that are warm. Those are the bits that are getting the warm light. The dark areas, shadows, are getting cold. So let's have a look at what happens if I change our shadows to be warmer and our midtones to be warmer. Now there's 2 things going on here, remember. Number 1, I'm changing only shadows and midtones and leaving highlights, so it's not affecting anything that's bright. Number 2, it's only doing it in the masked area here, not in the rest of the picture. So we're sort of protecting 2 things. We're saying do not change this at all anyway, or only a small amount as we come this way, and only change things that are in the shadows or the midtones. Now, this is personal choice, but you know, that one there is warmed up. Let's just clone it. We can do a comparison. Let's do it with white balance on this one. So to the left is our color balance version. To the right is our white balance version. In my head, or in my eyes, the one on the left is probably more natural than the one on the right. The one on the right, that white balance shift, remember that warm light is coming from the highlights. So shifting the shadows to be quite so warm, to be the same warmth, in order to get these midtones to match, is probably a step too far. They need to remain a little bit cooler. So to keep it natural, there's a good way of doing that, which is with the color balance tool. So, and again, we can do the reverse. We could cool down the highlights if we wanted to, but then I'd question whether that makes sense. But in broad terms, this is a very easy fix. We can do it through a gradient filter or gradient mask with a white balance change, gradient mask with a color balance change, or we don't even need to use the gradient mask. We could just do it. In fact, let's do that. So I'm going to do a new color balance. In fact, let's just get rid of that. I'm going to create a new filled layer. Color balance 2. And we're going to go for just shadows up nice and warm. Highlights up a bit warmer as well. Sorry, midtones up a bit warmer as well. And you can see it's not quite as targeted, let's call it that, as the original version with the gradient mask, but it hasn't affected these areas here, the highlights, as much as it has the shadows. And if ever you want to know which bits are highlight, which bits are shadow, which bits are midtone, just move your mouse around. This here, we can see the orange bar along the histogram as I move around. This is all shadows and midtones. Here there's some midtones, you can see it around the middle. Here, more into highlights. Here, definitely highlights. Down here, definitely shadows. So as I'm watching that orange bar, I'm able to say, okay, well, any change to the shadows is going to affect only this stuff. Any change to the midtones is only this stuff. Any change to the highlights is only there. And that's a perfect example of where you can use color balance and effectively the contrast in color to even up the scene if you want to. And yes, Tony, the color balance version looks natural. It does. And this is one thing, a lot of people try to use white balance alone to try and fix big changes in images. The problem is you've got to think about the scene. And in this scene, this shadow here was cooler than this area here. Why? Because it's not hit by the sunlight. So you've got to be careful that you're not trying to even out stuff that nature actually made work. I've just seen one comment on the licensing thing. So, Monty, I'm trying to decide if the person that used the word scheme ever went to school or is just honest. No, the person that used the word scheme went to school in Europe, where scheme isn't an issue as a word. I believe there are some challenges with some people in the US who've read the word scheme as a different take on what it actually means, which is program or process or whatever. There's lots of different words for scheme, but as a European company, strangely, Capture One will use European phrases, and unfortunately, they don't always translate. Just like color, add a U, looks much better. But all joking aside, it's the challenge with working in a global environment. No matter what words you use in communications, unfortunately, there will always be one dialect or language where it translates in a slightly different way to what you intended. So anyway, let's go to, where are we? Next image, Richard. Oh, final thing on this. I'm going to repeat it. Most of the issue here would have been resolved if when Daniel did the pano, the exposure had been locked and the white balance had been locked. You'd have got that natural view, and then it's a lot easier to be able to change some of the functions in it. Just for reference, from this final version or this final version, I would be tempted just to pull this foreground away from my attention if the whole point is down here, and I wouldn't do it with a vignette because we've already got some vignetting in the corners. So what I'd do is just a very, very soft gradient up here, pull down that exposure, maybe not that much, bit more brightness, and then I'd probably put something up here as well, off to a slight angle in there. Again, pull down that exposure, and all I'm doing is just pulling the viewer into seeing that middle part first. Could do it with the radial mask, could do it with vignette, but I don't know where you wanted to go with the image, Daniel, but in terms of your initial question, how do we balance that up? A, could have been done at the time of shooting, but B, if it's not the end of the world. You can do it to the stitched DNG because it behaves like a raw file. Easy. Paula, is this a 4:3 ratio? I don't know, actually. It's a 2400 by 300 or 3000, so no, what is that? That's some weird, that's a 5:4, yeah. This is 5:4 ratio, not 4:3. If it was 4:3, we'd go wider here. So I'm not sure of the crop intention, but I'm guessing it was intentional at 5:4. Okay, Richard. Sorry, let's get rid of that. So, question from Richard, and the answer to the question, Richard, is in the question, actually. But I think there's a better solution for what you were looking for. So the question that Richard sent in was: is it possible to isolate a color using a luma range? And the short answer, no. The I guess more lengthy answer, as it were, is yes, if the color that you're trying to select is a different luminosity to the other colors. But as you know, when you take away the color, quite often what you think is something that's very different and contrasty actually sits in the same grayscale value. So you may get lucky. In a picture, you may find that the luminosity of your yellows is very different to the luminosity of the reds. Therefore, you can select them independently of themselves. Just so people can see, let's go on to here and look at the before through to, oh, sorry, that's a TIFF. Let's go to the EIB, the before and after. So this is the original. This is the final, and you can see Richard's added quite a lot of detail in there and texture and so on. So there's some light beam stuff going on up here. There's a lot of layers in here actually, with lots of different beams and illumination stuff. But to the question, if I'm lucky, as I say, I could pick, let's say I want to pick out this yellow. I'm just going to clone this actually, so separate here. So I could maybe pick out the yellow. Let's go and draw a nice area here with a brush. There. And let's go to our Luma range and try, in fact, we can cheat a little bit. So if I move my mouse over here, oops, didn't mean to crop that. Press the wrong button. Let's move our mouse over the yellow. And when I do, it's going to give me a readout at the top of 95. So 91, 95, 90, see that up here? So the numbers up here will tell me exactly what is under the mouse pointer. So 90 to 95, all good. So let's go to my Luma range. And I now know that if I put that range to around about 90 through to 95, around there, then we're definitely getting the yellow. I can really narrow it down into there. In fact, that's not quite enough. Maybe the readout was, maybe I had my mouse in the wrong place. But let's try and get to there-ish. Bit of a soft radius just so that we don't have any sort of binary fall off. Let's hit apply. Have I got just the yellow? Well, oops, I used an existing layer. Sorry about that. We will, I'm not going to do that just in case I do something very, very wrong with that, but we know where we've got to go to. So back to our Luma range, back to here, back to there, and back to there. Nice soft edging. Let's try and get that. Okay. So in theory, I've just got the yellow. Let's pull up the exposure. And I don't quite have the yellow. I've got the yellow, but I also have some of these shadows, also have some of the other stuff. And as you saw, I'm having to get so specific, and I've only got a range of 255 to choose from. So you end up, yes, you can select it, but it's going to look pretty ropey the second you try and do stuff with it, because it's not going to be just that yellow. So the natural thing to do in that case is, instead of using Luma range, we're going to use the color editor. So if I go into our color editor, I can create a new layer here. Yellow color editor. Nice big brush over here. Don't have to actually brush it for the color editor. We can just pick the color anyway. But let's go into, where are we? Sorry, go mad. Go to our advanced, and we're going to pick on this yellow here. I can tick the box to say view selected color range. On this shot, it's a bit difficult because it turns everything else grayscale, but everything was almost grayscale to start with. But okay, so we've now got yellow. The problem with the color editor, and a lot of people see this, is now with that yellow, let's make it a bit smoother. I can change the hue of the yellow, and it's done a much better job, you can see, of selecting that color than the Luma range did. So Luma range for differences in luminosity, color editor for differences in color. So let's turn this to be green. Yeah, it does a good job, looks natural. Yeah, orange, okay. I could change the saturation, but you can see actually what a good job of selecting it's done. And I could change the lightness. But if I want to change something else, clarity, what else? Dehaze, or if I want to do selective dehaze, or maybe I want to pull down the exposure or the contrast or something like that, I can't do it in the color editor. So this is why there's a question about how do I mask a color. And the answer is really simple, and it's hidden, unfortunately. And it's hidden under the little hamburger. Sorry, under the little 3 dots. Create masked layer from selection. So what this does is it takes my color selection, only the stuff that's in this little area here, which I can tweak. I can make smaller, bigger, smoother, and whatever else. And it creates a whole new... of course, because we've got too many layers, more than 16 layers. Let's just delete one of them. So create a masked layer from selection. And what that's now giving me is a mask based on just that color selection. And if I go to my grayscale mask, so Option and M or Alt and M, we get a lovely little view of what's going on here. If I want to soften that mask, easy, right click, go to Refine Mask, and I can change, don't want to go too far obviously, but change the radius of how far that mask is spreading to smooth it out. So now I have a mask that is on the yellow. I can go in and pull up saturation, just like I was doing with the color editor. I can even shift the color if I wanted to with the color editor again. But more importantly, I can now play with exposure. I could also play with a bit of contrast. I could play with clarity. Up here, a bit of structure. And it's only affecting the yellow bits that I chose in the advanced color editor. Now this is no longer, you can see there's nothing now selected on this layer of the yellow in the editor. That remains on the layer I was playing with. So if I want to make changes to these areas, and the changes can be done in the color editor, I don't need to do what I've just done. I can select the color area just like that. I can go to my saturation, hue and lightness, and I can change them to my heart's content because they're contained within the tool. If I need to do something that's a bit further out than this tool, so exposure, contrast, clarity, structure, sharpen, whatever, to that color, go to the 3 dots, create a masked layer from the selection, and it takes the color selection that you've made, creates a new layer, as you've just seen. If you've already got 16 layers, you won't be able to, so remember that, there is a limit. But on your new layer, you will find it's created a mask, just like any other mask that you could have drawn, except it's going to be a much more accurate mask to that color. So, Richard, answer being no for luminosity mask. But yes, there is a way in the color editor of doing it. And let's just turn that off. So if I wanted, I don't know which one you wanted to go for, but if it was this yellow with that mask, I can make that pop a little bit, not using Luma Range, but by using the color editor instead. Okay. I think we're there with Richard's. We can just review some of the changes that he's made, actually, because it's quite a lot of changes in here. So first thing, there's some darkening up here. There's a light beam. This is, I think, the main beam there that's been added. So there's a mask, and we've got on here, I think, a exposure change. So half a stop. We've got another beam up here to add into it. We've got a load of horizontal work in there. We've got darkening of the sky at the top, excluding the beam. That would make sense. There's some healing going on. There's another beam down here. I think there was a little spot. I think he's got a little code. There's a little dot somewhere else on the foreground anyway, just to match that beam. I may have deleted it just to get another layer. But there's a lot of work in this shot to go from there to there. And if you wanted the color to really pop, that's how to do it. Use the color editor, create a mask from it, and then you've got free reign on what you want to do. David, I'd guess you could also apply a Luma Range on top of the color mask if needed. Yes. So if I didn't want to, it depends, doesn't it? So if I wanted to choose a specific saturation of color, very different, I would probably be tempted still to do it in the color editor, because I can do it through here. I can say stuff that's not very saturated include, and stuff that's very saturated include. If I want to do it based on the lightness of those pixels, which is slightly different to saturation, then yes, you could use a Luma Range on top of your color selection, because this doesn't allow you to choose luminosity necessarily. to get a very, very specific area identified. But that would, you're talking about a very, very specific area there. I guess if you're doing commercial work with maybe colors in a showroom or colors in a product or something like that, that'd be really useful. You could actually target in on not just the color, but also the brightness of an area, and then make your changes from there. That'd be good. A nice feature, asymmetrical radial gradients. Do you mean, Angela? Sorry, Paula, wrong person. Let me just check what you mean. I'm going to just get rid of that layer so I can have a new one. This is a gradient. As you see, it's symmetrical. So as I move the mouse, it moves around. Now, if I hold down the Option key, I can, sorry, where are we? Is it Option or Shift? One of them. There is a way. And I can't remember which one it was. Someone actually showed me this the other day. There was a way of doing something fancy with this, which we'd played with. I'm going to need to do a bit of checking. But there was a way of doing something asymmetrical. I can't remember exactly how we did it, but we'll find it. But yes, to your point, Paula, to create cone shape gradients. Yeah, I'm going to have a play. I'll come back to you. There was something that we were playing with a while ago that allowed you to get almost the output that I was looking for. But I won't do it now. I won't waste time trying to experiment. I'll follow it up later on. So Keith, with the limit on the number of layers, can you create another variant and then start adding more layers to the variant? No, because that variant will carry across all the layers. What you'd have to do effectively is flatten the image, which means you're then limited on what you can edit in the raw, but then the flat, let's say TIFF or PSD, would then start with 0 layers, and then you could build layers on top. But no, if you create a variant, or you clone a variant, it creates an exact copy, including all the layers of the previous one. If you create a new variant, it strips all the layers away. So the limit really is 16, unfortunately. Mario, move the center point with Alt. Yeah, it's something. No, it's something like that. It's not that. It was something. I'll find it. Don't worry. We'll get there. But I'll update everyone in the comments later on. Anyway, different thing. That was down to experimenting a couple of weeks ago. Let's go to Ralph shot. Ralph. So Ralph's question was: is there any way of warming up this image without getting the pink tones that come out as a result? Well, there's a couple things with this shot. So I'm going to clone it for a start, and we're going to do a before and after. So there's a before, there's after. And what Ralph's done is use the color editor, interestingly, given what we've just talked about, but to push the saturation up in the yellows. So it's on the background layer, so it's affecting everything. There's no selection on there. And it's pushing all the yellows to be warmer. So if I were to undo this temporarily, so if ever you want to undo something temporarily, hold down the Option key or Alt key and press the undo button above the tool. So that's before, that's after. Before, after. So you can see why it's an enriching of the yellows. But I'm not sure it's necessary for the overall picture, but we'll come back to it. So also on here, there's a custom white balance, and we can see on the original, if I actually just reset this, our white balance was 5077, little cool, 5.9 on tint. The background here is now been set to 5668, so a bit warmer and a bit less tint. And I think this is where I was trying to get rid of that pink, trying to move it towards the green. Now, this, unfortunately, as a result, also ends up being pretty harsh as an image. So we go from here to here, and I'm worried that it's almost a step too far. It's pushing things a bit too much. And there's nothing else going on in here. There's nothing going on in here. There's a lot of clarity in there, which is pushing some of the contrast up, but it's mostly that white balance change, which is making it really, really harsh and really, really, quite almost sickly to look at because there's just so much of a shift towards yellow in what would be white. So let's go back to where we were. In fact, I'm going to clone this variant. I'm going to keep Ralph's healing brush areas, but I'm just going to reset all of these areas here. Reset our color editor and reset our white balance. So we get back to pretty much where we were in the first place. There's a subtle change there. I don't know if you can notice between the two. So something else is going on in this image, and another, there we are, there's a shift in the red levels. So we're going to shift that too. So we're now back to as the image was, but with Ralph's healing on it. So instead of doing it on the background layer, we're going to create a new field adjustment layer. And we're going to do it with the color balance tool, just like we did just now, because that move of the white balance is shifting everything to be warmer. So if we wanted the trees to feel warmer, which sort of makes sense, and if we wanted maybe the, I don't know, the overall tone to just slightly warm up, that's fine. But in order to move these trees from being that cool to that warm, look at what's happened with the clouds. What we can do is do it through the color balance tool, because that allows us to separate these out. We've already got that done for us. Capture One already has, and some people see the color balance tool like this, which is the mask color balance. So I can overall warm up the image, make it pink, make it green, whatever. So we can make it, you know, nice and warm through that. It's not the same as white balance. It's actually adjusting the hues with the color editor. But that's going to move everything the same way that the white balance did. Instead, use the three-way. And what we use is the highlights left alone for now. Shadows we're going to warm up. There we go. The mid-tones we can warm a little bit, maybe into there. And then the highlights we can choose. We can actually cool down the highlights. It'll be a bit weird. But the highlights we can choose how far we want them to go. We can even drop down in terms of their brightness. And that allows us then maybe to put the shadows a little bit more into there. We might want to reduce our contrast just a touch. So yes, you can use high contrast, but equally you can go negative with contrast. And as you start warming things up and using golden time and golden hour and golden light, one of the features of golden light is that typically it's quite diffused, it's quite soft, but putting contrast down, pulling clarity down, get to it a little bit, and putting our shadow up maybe, or get this warmer look. Now, look warmer than that, absolutely. Does it look natural? White balance, yes. Or white balance and clarity. So I would try and use, sorry, sorry, how about now? It's not my voice. Barry, it's not my voice. So hopefully you can hear me now. Let me know if you can, if that's clearer. You might get a lot more background noise, but better. Okay. Sorry about that, guys. Not sure exactly what's going on there, but quick reset. So you may hear a bit more background, sorry, but let's just finish off this image. So we're going to go back to, I don't know how long ago we were at. Effectively, using color balance as a more subtle way of shifting the warmth of an image compared to doing it using white balance. White balance is going to be shifting the entire range of every single value, regardless of whether it's in the shadows, the highlights, the midtones, anywhere. And it's going to be doing that to almost a sledgehammer level. If you push it too far and you push too much contrast, too much clarity, all of those sort of things. If you use color balance and use it selectively, we get to a much more natural place. And again, let's do the before and after. This is a subtle change to warm up that scene. It doesn't make it hit you in the face. It's not high contrast. It's not everything has gone way too yellow, way too orange or whatever, because we've got a lot more selective control over it. And that control comes from these three wheels down here. And they're underrated. We don't use those wheels enough. So please do use the color balance tool where white balance is too heavy a change. Same applies for making it cool. So if we wanted to clone that variant, let's go to our white balance, or sorry, our color balance here. And instead, let's make the midtones cooler. And let's make the shadows cooler. So if we wanted to almost vintage this shot, you'll find that color balance can do a really good job. And if I create a new variant of this, so that's the original. That's using white balance. That's using color balance to warm it up. And that's using color balance to cool it down. So those, well, three methods, as it were, are really powerful ways of doing things. But sometimes don't use white balance as the be all and end all for how to change the content of your image. You can use so many other tools to do it. And that's going to be the difference that you see with the color balance tool. I'm just going to try and switch something. So if everything goes weird, you may have to let me know, but we'll see. So let's just try. If I don't sound like a Dalek, then we're all good. It's not my voice. If I do, then we'll switch back. So the short answer to this question. So if we go back and look at Daniel, we could fix this with white balance, but actually there's no need to. We can use the color balance tool to be able to do it. We can fix or choose Richard's area of foliage or the yellow stuff with the Luma range, but you saw it's not as good. Use the color editor to do it. Color is one of the most important elements of Capture One. The way that we can select individual color values, individual luminosities, individual saturations within color, and choose the color change that we want based on whether it's in the shadows, midtones, or the highlights. All good. And then in Ralph's, this is a good example of where using white balance can push it too far, and the color balance tool is often a more subtle way of doing stuff. Okay, finally then, because we've got a couple of minutes left, let's go to Francois' shot. So Francois used one of the styles that we created in Elevation called Golden Hour. First thing, Francois, this is going to be a very, very, very minor niggle. Your horizon isn't quite level. It is tiny, but it's not quite level. Let's move it on the right here. And let's have a look on the left. Here we have a gap, so it needs to be fixed. But that's me being picky. In general, I like the edit. This is the original. This is the new. I think it probably goes a little bit too pink and a little bit too light, if I'm honest, because if this was at dusk, it's great to try and recover all the detail, but it's lost some atmosphere. And we've also brought up some of this stuff here. I guess that was someone in the water there. You know, we're seeing stuff that we wouldn't necessarily see in the original one. We're just focusing on the building and the pier. So my personal view would be to go back to this background. And for the pink element, I'd almost be tempted just to pull that tint back a bit, just to neutralize and maybe warm up a little. Now, I'm conscious that on top of that, we've got the Golden Hour style. So that's the without the style. That's with the warming style on top of it. So I get that we don't want to push this too far, but I'm just trying to sort of counter it a little bit. On top of that, I'm going to create a new bottom grad. You can guess what's going to happen. We're just going to knock out some of the detail in this beach and also help the viewer get back up to looking at what's important in this shot. So we're just going to pull down that exposure down there. We might even want to pull down some contrast. Now, pulling down the contrast, because this all sits in the midtones, you can end up with a slightly lightening of the image. So, and then I'm going to pull down brightness a touch as well, just to try and sort of push out some of the obviousness of those areas here. And I'm going to do the same with the sky. So top grad, very, very, very soft grad. We don't want to see the effect of this too much. I'm just going to pull that exposure down. Again, not a lot, a third, maybe that. And that just, to me, gives us, you know, from there to there, this just feels a little more dusky, a little more warm, I guess. Yeah, it just feels a bit more natural than where we were there. This feels like we brought up too much detail. This gets our viewer, back to looking at the buildings. But the edit itself, great. You've got all the highlights recovered in here. It's nice and sharp. There's no halos or anything over there. So we've got to have a look at the horizon. But other than that, we're all good. Everything I've just done is around taste rather than necessity. Prasad, please bring color range tools similar to Luma range tools so you can dynamically control. Well, you kind of have that with the color editor. I get what you mean, but you can do quite a lot of this with the color editor and then create a mask from the color editor. But yeah, put it in as a request into Capture One. So support.captureone.com. Put the request in. Off you go. So that's it for this week. We will be back. It'll actually be next year. Scary. So it'll be in January that we do the next live edit session. Today we've got this very quick one with Francois, Ralph's warming fix, as it were. So color editor, use it. Color balance tool, use it. Don't just go straight to the white balance tool. Color balance can sometimes get you out of a hole. Can we use a Luma range to select a color? You can, but I wouldn't. Use the color editor and create a mask from it. And Daniel with the pano, you know, capture the individual images a lot more stable if you can. So lock in your white balance, lock in your exposure. You're going to have an easier time. But when you do bring it into Capture One, there's nothing stopping you playing with all the tools we just talked about across that image and get something that looks pretty nice overall. So well done. Between now and next time, so obviously knock yourselves out. Discuss your outrage at my stance on subscriptions, because that's always fun. But between now and when we are next editing, which will be next month, that will be announced in the Facebook group. It'll also come up on your YouTube if you're subscribed. Send in any images, so paulreeferlive.wetransfer.com. You can send in your raw file, please include your name and include any issues you've got. Between now and that time, we've got the masterclass things. So if you want to have a look at those, they're in the description. We covered last week capturing the night sky and how to edit it. So feel free to look at those over the holiday period. And between now and then, look after yourselves. Stay tuned for any updates from Capture One, and we'll see you then. Cheers, everyone. Bye-bye.